freedom. It's something we all strive for, something we deeply desire. But what if I told you that true freedom isn't about doing whatever you want, whenever you want? What if freedom is actually found in doing what you don't want? This idea sounds contradictory, doesn't it? But this paradox comes straight from the mind of one of the greatest philosophers of all time, Immanuel Kant. In today's video, we'll explore what Kant meant when he said, "You are only free when you do what you don't want." We'll dive deep into how this seemingly contradictory thought could actually hold the key to a life of true freedom and purpose. Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher in the 18th century who revolutionized the way we think about ethics, morality, and human freedom. His works, like the Critique of Pure Reason and the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, are some of the most influential philosophical texts ever written. But it's his concept of freedom that has left many people puzzled. For Kant, true freedom is not about following our immediate desires, but instead about acting according to moral principles that come from our own reason. In other words, freedom, for Kant, is about discipline, self-control, and choosing to do the right thing, even when you don't want to. At first glance, many of us equate freedom with the ability to do whatever we want. We think, if I can act on my desires without restraint, then I'm truly free. But Kant challenges this notion. He argues that following our desires doesn't make us free. It actually makes us slaves to those desires. Think about it. When we give in to every impulse, are we really making a conscious choice, or are we being driven by our instincts, by external influences? For Kant, acting on impulse is not a sign of freedom. It's a sign of being controlled by forces outside ourselves, like our cravings, fears, and societal pressures. In this sense, we're not truly free if we only follow what we want in the moment. True freedom, according to Kant, comes from acting in line with reason, with moral duty, and with long-term goals, even when it's uncomfortable or hard. So, the question becomes, are you living in alignment with your higher principles, or are you just reacting to momentary desires? To understand Kant's view of freedom, we have to dive into his ethical philosophy. Kant believed in what he called the categorical imperative, which is essentially a universal moral law that applies to everyone, regardless of personal desires. This law isn't something imposed from the outside. It's something we arrive at through our own rational thought. We are free when we act according to this moral law, not when we simply follow our fleeting wants. But here's the twist. The moral law often requires us to do things we don't want to do. It requires sacrifice, discipline, and sometimes going against our immediate comforts. This is why Kant says, "You are only free when you do what you don't want." It's in those moments, when you choose to follow a higher principle rather than an easy desire, that you are truly exercising your freedom. Imagine someone who wants to stay in bed all day, but knows they have work to do, goals to achieve, and responsibilities to fulfill. The person who stays in bed is acting on impulse, not freedom. But the person who gets up, even when they don't want to, and pursues their purpose, that person is truly free, because they are acting in alignment with their higher values. Kant's philosophy may have been written centuries ago, but it has profound implications for how we live today. In a world that glorifies instant gratification, from social media to fast food to easy entertainment, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that freedom is doing whatever feels good in the moment. But real freedom, the kind that leads to a fulfilling and meaningful life, requires something deeper. Take, for example, the practice of self-discipline. At first glance, discipline seems like the opposite of freedom. After all, discipline means saying no to certain desires, following rules, and pushing yourself to do things that are hard. But think about the long-term effects of discipline: better health, more success, personal growth. Discipline, in fact, is the path to true freedom because it allows you to live according to your principles and reach your highest potential. On the other hand, if you constantly give in to what you want in the moment, whether it's eating junk food, avoiding hard work, or seeking temporary pleasure, you'll find yourself trapped in a cycle of dissatisfaction. This is what Kant meant. True freedom comes from doing what is difficult, from mastering yourself, and from following the path of reason and morality. Kant wasn't the only philosopher to explore the idea of freedom. Friedrich Nietzsche, for example, had his own take on the subject. Nietzsche believed in the concept of the will to power, the idea that true freedom comes from overcoming obstacles and mastering oneself. Like Kant, Nietzsche saw freedom not as indulging in desires, but in conquering them and using your will to create your own path. Jean-Paul Sartre, another influential philosopher, took a different approach. Sartre believed that humans are condemned to be free. In his existentialist view, we are constantly faced with choices, and those choices define who we are. For Sartre, freedom can be a source of anxiety because it means taking responsibility for your actions and for who you become. But like Kant, Sartre also saw that true freedom requires making difficult choices, even when those choices go against what we might want in the moment. What all of these thinkers have in common is the idea that true freedom is not about comfort. It's about responsibility, discipline, and aligning yourself with a greater purpose. So how can we apply Kant's idea of freedom to our own lives? Here are 3 practical steps to start embracing the kind of freedom that comes from doing what you don't want to do. 1. Set clear principles and stick to them. One of the best ways to practice Kant's idea of freedom is by establishing a set of personal principles or values that guide your life. Whether it's integrity, hard work, or compassion, these principles should be your compass. And when a moment comes where you don't want to follow them, when it's easier to cut corners or avoid discomfort, remind yourself that true freedom lies in staying true to these values. 2. Practice self-discipline in small ways. Freedom doesn't always come from grand gestures. It often starts with small, everyday decisions. Practice saying no to things you don't need, like distractions or unhealthy habits. The more you develop the habit of self-discipline, the more free you'll feel in the long run. 3. Embrace discomfort as a path to growth. Finally, start seeing discomfort as an opportunity for growth. Whether it's facing a tough challenge, pushing yourself to try something new, or doing what you'd rather avoid, remember that each time you overcome that discomfort, you are strengthening your inner freedom. Freedom, in this sense, is found in the moments when you rise above your impulses. In the end, Kant's paradoxical statement, "You are only free when you do what you don't want," challenges us to rethink what freedom really means. It's not about doing whatever feels good in the moment. It's about living in alignment with your higher principles and becoming the best version of yourself. By embracing self-discipline, responsibility, and moral duty, we find a deeper, more fulfilling kind of freedom. So, what will you do today to embrace this freedom? Let me know in the comments below. What's one thing you know you need to do, but have been avoiding because it's uncomfortable? Let's start practicing real freedom together.